In Section 30, we're going to switch away from the classification of merchandise to an analysis of how customs duties are assessed in the United States, very closely related to the valuation of products. As we saw previously, the rate of duty, if any, because some of our examples were indeed free of duty, the rate of duty assigned to a product depends a great deal on its country of origin. We've said this a couple of times. We're going to dig deeper into this subject. Sub-bullet, and certainly without politicizing the presentation, but it's true to a real extent, duty rates assigned to a certain country are driven by the geopolitical relationship that country has with the United States. We were pretty explicit about this point in previous sections. Through its rates of duty columns, the United States plays favorites: normal trade relations, special trade relations, those general and special subcolumns under column 1. And then the bad guys in column 2 that have excessive duty rates if they're allowed to import at all from those countries. Sub-bullet, let's say it again a little differently. The better the relationship a country has with the U.S., the lower the duty rate on certain, but not all, products. That's another important point to make. Textiles, for example, no matter where they come from, have a tendency to be higher duty rates. We saw that in our denim jeans, 16.6% coming out of China. For certain, before we move on, the U.S. plays favorites. And the more we like a country, the lower the duty rate, usually, but not always. We saw this. We're going to dig even deeper into the subject. But in bullet 1, the varying rates of duty applied to countries is found, as we saw, in columns 1 and 2 of an HTS chapter page. We saw a bunch of examples of that. We're going to look again, but this time from the perspective of assessing customs duties, which is driven by, among other things, the country of origin. We know that column 1 is broken down into 2 columns, the general and the special. General for countries with normal trade relations with the United States, and special for both preferential duty programs and free trade agreements. To summarize, last bullet, that general column is for sure reserved for countries that have NTR, normal trade relations with the United States. That actually used to be called, some years back, MFN, most favorable nation. The government changed the name to normal trade relations because it didn't sound so favorable. Most favored nation is pretty explicit. Normal trade relations, a little softer. What that means is that duty rates are applied equally among countries with NTR. In that general column, if it says 4.4% for a lathe, all countries with NTR status with the United States, the duty rate's 4.4. It can be different in the special column. We saw some examples of that too. To summarize again, the special column is for countries with special tariff treatment programs with the U.S. A preferential duty program like the Generalized System of Preferences, or free trade agreements. NAFTA, which will be changing its name relatively soon, but it's still called NAFTA as of the time of this recording. The U.S.-Israel Free Trade Agreement. We talked about Colombia, Panama, all of Central America, and the Dominican Republic, CAFTA, as it's called. That's what we mean by free trade agreements. And column 2, those are the bad guys. As of the recording of this section, it was Cuba and North Korea. But it's for countries that have neither NTR or special tariff treatment programs. Super high duty rates, and for the most part, one cannot import from those countries anyway. Trade tip, as of the recording of this section, we just said this, the 2 countries that fall under column 2 status are indeed Cuba and North Korea. New title to our slide, Applying Customs Duties in the U.S., Unit or Quantity. We saw this in previous examples. Going all the way back to the importation of horses, it was per horse. We also saw, in the case of our blue jeans, it was by dozen. That's what we mean by unit or quantity. First bullet. One very important component of assessing customs duties in the U.S. is related to the unit or quantity used to calculate said duties. In most cases, we saw this with our lathe. The unit or quantity is based on a single item. In our example here, one diesel-powered generator, but it's certainly applied to the lathe example too. Last bullet, depending on the product, there are instances where other units of measure are used. Per pair, in our shoe example, going all the way back to the example from San Pedro Sula in Honduras, per kilo, could be per liter for liquids, for chemicals, for example. We don't know. We have to look in the column to see. Last slide in this section, continuing on with unit or quantity. The unit or quantity column in the HTS US is important because it aids in determining how duties are assessed. In the majority of cases, duties in the US are applied on what is called an ad valorem basis, which is a percentage of the value of the goods. It doesn't have to be that way. It could also be applied as 3% ad valorem on a product plus 10 cents per piece. It is very, very often a percentage, ad valorem as it's called. It doesn't have to be. To summarize, last bullet, in some instances, duties are applied based on a combination of ad valorem and another unit of measure. 3% ad valorem, as we just said, with 10 cents per piece, whatever the product happens to be. We're going to stop here, and when we come back, continue on, this time with a visual of the structure for rates of duty, unit or quantity, and the columns themselves. This layout should be very familiar to us, so we'll be able to go through it, not fast, but a little bit quicker than previously. So do come back, speaking of quickly, as fast as you can.